We are ready for you starting it off, Chris.
Okay, so today we will bring you 5 possible perspectives on the day of Jesus' crucifixion and of people who knew Jesus. So as we do our readings, see if you can tell who is doing each reading, and then after the 5 readings, we will reveal the speaker's identity. So Ben will do the first reading. So see if you can figure out who he is.
My name? It's Simon. It's not important anyway. You all look like travelers. Were you at Golgotha today? Well, I was, but I didn't plan to be, but I was. Plans. What a joke. I didn't plan any of this. No, this was my expectation. I was his right hand man. I thought I'd figured it out. I mean, I knew I never had him figured out, but you've heard of him, no doubt. The healer, the rabbi, the rebel. But he's more than that to me. You know, I was one of the first ones he asked to follow him, right? I got on the ground floor. I laughed with him. I fished with him. I ate with him. I sat around the fire with him. I heard him talk about his father, and I was the first one to get it. The first one to speak the truth. Everyone else is afraid to put into words. He looked at me and he said, "Just who do you think I am?" I'll never forget it. He had the most curious look on his eye when he asked us that. You know what it reminded me of? It kind of looked like my wife. When I walk in the door and she prepared my favorite meal, it's a look of anticipation, waiting for my reaction when I smell that lamb and all the special spices she's made for me. That's the look she had, or he had. A look of excited anticipation to see if we got it, to see us react when we realize the truth. And I did. I got it. And I spoke it aloud. He is the Messiah, the anointed one, the one sent to deliver us and fix the mess we're in. And I knew it first. He told me I was a rock. Andrew told me I must have been dumb as a rock, but I knew what he meant. I was ready to be the general of his army. More than ready. I was eager, waiting for the moment to prove my worth to him. Last night, I thought that moment came. When the priest showed up with the soldiers to arrest him, I drew my sword and rushed to the soldiers arresting him. That's what the Messiah's right-hand man is supposed to do. Except, he said no. He told me to put my sword away, and he healed the wound I inflicted. I didn't get it. They took him away, tried him, beat him, crucified him. He warned me I would deny him. I argued with him, told he was crazy, told him I'd die for him. But here I am. I ran. I fled. I couldn't even stand up to a servant girl when she said she recognized me. Some general. Scared of a little girl. He was my friend. How could I have done that? I went back, like I said, I was there. Cloak over my head, making sure I'd stay in the middle of the crowd so no one would see me. I couldn't even bring myself to look at him. But I could hear. And over the murmuring of the crowd, I heard his voice. The voice I'd learned so well over the past 3 years. Weakened, yes. Anguished, yes. Strange, certainly, but still familiar. And all the incredible things I'd heard and seen following him, his words in that moment topped the list. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And standing there, lost in the shadow of my betrayal, I knew I was one of them. He forgave me. I know it. But can I bring myself to accept it? Can I?
Okay, I'll be doing the second reading. They say particular senses are linked really closely with memory. I guess that's true. The smell of baking bread definitely brings back strong memories of my mother's cooking. But I think the one that does it for me is the sense of touch. Just thinking about a certain texture can take me back to a moment, like the rough lines of a fishing net sliding through my hands. No matter how old I get, or how far from the lake, I'll never forget how it feels to tie a knot, to mend a hole in a torn net. You can lose a lot of good fish if you're not careful, and when that's your livelihood, you learn to mend those holes quickly and carefully. That's what I was doing that day when we first heard his voice. I was tying knots, and my brother was gathering it up as I did, so it didn't get tangled. Not fun, but necessary. We'd been out to hear the wilderness preacher a few times. He was captivating. wild hair, strange garments, and he had told us to watch for the Messiah, that he was close. He told us to be watching, so I was. I listened to all the rumors about conquerors and potential rulers and those who claimed to be the deliverer. But I just couldn't figure out who it was supposed to be. And what was I supposed to do about it, even if I figured it out? And then it happened. That day, when I was just sitting there with my brother on our boat, anchored just offshore, working hard, fixing the nets, there came a voice from the shore. Follow me. I can't explain to you how those words hit me. I didn't just hear them, I felt them. I looked at the man on the shore, and he looked back. Again, he said, follow me. It wasn't harsh. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation, an exclamation, an opportunity. And I didn't know it then, but those words, they were a promise. I let the net fall, and I followed him. The last 3 years have gone by quickly, and right now, much of it is a blur. But I remember how some things felt. I remember stooping down and feeling what was left of the mud he made with saliva and dirt, while he stepped forward and spread it on that blind man's eyes. It just felt like regular mud, but using it, he was able to make that man see. I remember reaching in and picking up the last piece of bread, filling the bottom of the basket with my fingers, only to reach in a moment later and find that there was still more. I remember the hungry hands of people grasping for bread that only moments ago had not even existed. I remember picking up a shard of a broken jar which seconds earlier had held valuable perfume. I remember tracing my thumb over the sharp edge while he spoke gently to the young woman who had poured out that perfume. I remember the feeling of my shoulder resting against him as the 13 of us reclined around the table last night. I remember reaching out for him too late, feeling his cloak pulled from my fingers as the soldiers led him away. I remember. What will I remember of today? I will remember the feeling of his mother's head resting on my shoulder. I will remember the warmth of her quiet tears soaking through my cloak. I will remember how she trembled as she spoke to us both. He hung there in agony, and then came that same voice that called me to follow, not as strong, but just as clear, first to his mother, then to me. Woman, behold your son. Behold your mother. In his last moments, from within that dark shadow of aloneness, he reminded us that we are not meant to be alone. He reminded us of our need for each other. We are meant to be woven together, much like a net, depending on the strength of another, mending the broken places, working together for his purpose. I will remember.
I was so hungry. The only thing I wanted was a cup of water and some of my mother's stew. But I couldn't even figure things out well enough to form the words. But that man, one I'd never seen before, then he sent my sister to get me something to eat. And the second miracle that day, she did as she was told, without arguing. That was over 1.5 years ago. But when I saw him today, it came flooding back. My father didn't want me here today. And my father is a man who is used to getting his way. In our family shop, he rules the roost. At the synagogue, people do whatever he says without question. But at our house, between my sister and my mom and me, he's outnumbered. He's good-natured about it. He grumbles about not having any quiet, about the house being overrun by ribbons and perfume and pretty fabrics. But I know deep down he loves being able to provide those things for us. When the fever struck me year before the last, he sat beside me for 4 days, swabbing my forehead with wet cloths. He sent my sister to fetch the physician, but he said there was nothing he could do for me. By the third evening, I was so weak I couldn't open my eyes. I couldn't speak. My father sat there, mopping the sweet, singing songs and whispering, "Be strong in my sweetness, be strong." But I couldn't be. There was no strength left. The sickness was too much. I was burning up from the inside out. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't see. I couldn't speak. Then, I died. Funny, huh? Nobody should be able to say that. I shouldn't be able to say that I remember dying. but I do. It was like peeing in a deep pit that collapsed into me. Pressure, heat, darkness, and then nothing. But then, and this was confusing, then I felt somebody pick up my hand. And I couldn't feel the warmth of the other hand, but I knew my own hand was lifeless and cold. And somewhere in my dead mind, I knew I shouldn't be feeling anything. And I shouldn't be thinking about how I shouldn't be feeling anything. That tiny spark in the darkness, that moment of awareness, that just shouldn't have been, that just shouldn't have been. It was the most baffling thing I can ever imagine feeling. Then I heard him. At first, it was like hearing somebody from the next room, a voice muffled by the distance. But he spoke again and said, "Little girl, get up." I was annoyed for a second. From the time I was 9, I started hating being called little girl. And then I was almost 13. But the annoyance was burned away as the spark of awareness blazed into a flame, and then into an inferno. And then my eyes opened, and before I knew it, I was sitting up, and then standing up. And then, before I could make any sense of things, my parents were wrapping their arms around me. My mother was praying and thanking Yahweh, and my father was just repeating, my sweetness, over and over again. That's when the man I'd never seen sent my sister to get me a meal. Nothing had ever tasted better, and nothing has since. From that moment, my father kept me by his side whenever possible. He even took me to go hear the teacher speak on the hillside not long after the day I died. I saw people arriving at the hillside that day, not to brag, but I think I'm one of the few true experts on what it's like to be dead. And I can tell you some of those people were just as dead as I had been, in every way except physically. And I saw some of those same people leaving after they heard him, after he fed them. And that spark that I had, it was in their eyes, in their conversations. Not an inferno yet, maybe just a flame. But the spark was there. It made me happy. Today, Father wanted me to stay home. He didn't think I would understand, but I think I understand better than he does. I know the man who brought me back to life that day is good, holy, perfect, but a man that goes around setting fires like that, he makes people nervous too. He makes people nervous who've spent too many years keeping the flame under control, keeping it dim enough and cool enough that the darkness can skirt in pretty close. Those people finally got their way today. They crucified him. Today, standing by my father's side, I saw a nail sticking right through the hand that pulled me out of the pit. He said, "I thirst. I wish I could have sent my sister for a cup of water. If anyone ever deserved it, it was this powerful, compassionate, miracle-working man." He got a sponge full of vinegar, shoved in his face instead. My father broke down and sobbed. You think I would too. After all, I know what it's like being in that pit, starts to crumble and the light starts to fade, and you've overcome by the shadow of suffering. But I didn't weep. You want to know why? Because I know fire spreads, and even when you think it's gone out, the embers can burst back into life. After all, I'm living proof.
I watched every moment. It is the hardest thing any mother could ever have to do. But if, through his swollen, blackened eyes, he looked down from that cross, darkened by the shadow of awful crucifixion, I wanted to make sure he saw the face of one person who loved him. And he did. I almost broke down. His eyes met mine, the eyes that looked up at me from that hay-filled manger, the eyes that brimmed with tears as I cleaned his skinned elbow, the eyes that read the scrolls in the synagogue, the eyes that looked over Jerusalem and wept, the eyes that saw every need, every wound, every hurt, every sinful soul, and refused to look away. I knew long ago he was meant for a purpose. When you're visited by an angel, you start to understand that this baby you're carrying might be something more. When shepherds come to kneel at his makeshift cradle, a mother suspects that her baby's life will not be an ordinary one. When wise men bring gifts worth more money than the carpenter shop brings in a year, a mother should know that Yahweh has a plan bigger than she can wrap her mind around. When a mother finds her 12-year-old explaining the law and the prophets to the greatest teachers in Jerusalem, she can be fairly certain that there is something different in store for this boy. When your son looks in your face and says he has to be about his father's business, and something in your heart tells you that he doesn't mean carpentry, your heart skips a beat with the realization that this road will not be an easy one. When your son transforms plain water into the finest wine, when he restores sight, heals the lame, raises the dead, you know that this proves the divine intention behind his birth. These are the moments I've treasured in my heart. But a mother will worry, won't she? And I have. The more attention he drew to himself, the more the authorities threatened and whispered, the more I found myself wishing he would just come back to the carpenter shop and make a simple living. He's quite a good carpenter, you know. From the time Joseph taught him the skills, he worked hard to master them. I love to watch him work, pounding, sawing, sanding, tables, chairs, bowls, ladles. And then, when each one matched the plan he had sketched out on parchment, he would wipe away the dust, step back, spread his arms, smile, and say 3 simple words. 3 words that were a declaration of completion. I heard those words again today, and a mother knows. I knew that they meant much more than the same thing, though infinitely magnified. No furniture, no housewares this time, but still, there was a plan, sketched out and in place since before my son was formed in my womb, and I suspect for much longer. Today on that cross, his arms spread, I am almost positive that I saw on that bruised, wounded, blood-covered face, beyond belief, a smile. And I knew before he said them the words that came next. It is finished. But a mother knows things. It is finished. Yes, without a doubt. But it isn't over.
I'm not unfamiliar with death. I've spent my life as a soldier in the service of the empire. Early in my career, there were certainly long periods of time in which not one day passed that I did not see a fellow soldier or an enemy spill out his lifeblood on the ground. And of course, for the past year, I've been the commander of this detachment, charged with guarding prisoners and overseeing executions. I've seen the worst of humanity, both among those who die and those who come to watch. It was not an assignment I would have chosen, but when the word comes down from on high, a soldier does not question orders. But today I have questions. It was soldiers under my command who carried out Pilate's order to flog him. It was soldiers under my command who followed him through the streets to the place of the skull. It was soldiers under my command who tied the ropes and hammered the spikes that held him to the cross. And as my soldiers were busy carrying out their orders, it was I, Centurion Longinus, who, on the order of the authorities, nailed the sign above his head. "This is Jesus," it said, "King of the Jews." I had heard of him, of course, heard tell of great wonders and wise teachings from those who followed him, of rebellion and treason from the authorities of the region. I've heard him called a troublemaker, the Messiah, a rabble-rouser, a healer, a criminal, a savior, how can one know what to believe? But today, I've heard the last words of dozens, perhaps hundreds of men in my lifetime. I've heard them pleading for mercy, cursing those who sentenced them, even babbling nonsense. But today I, obedient soldier Longinus, saw a death like I've never ever witnessed. The sun had hidden itself for several hours by the time he died. The world felt strange, uneasy, draped in a shadow of death. And when he died, the uneasiness erupted into chaos. It rumbled and quaked, and we struggled to keep our footing. Now, I would remember all of that, no doubt. But what I'll remember even more are the words I heard him speak just before the moment of death. He turned his face to the sky and cried out, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." Why did he look into heaven and call upon his Father? Just who is he talking to? It disturbs me. I've never seen someone die like that. No fear, just purpose, meaning. Jesus, King of the Jews? Soldiers are not trained for discussions of royalty, but surely this man was the Son of God. And I'm left with one question. What now?
So those were our 5 readings. Any guesses? So Ben was our first reader. Any thoughts as to who Ben might have been reading for? Peter, yep. So in Luke 22:54 through 62, we read that Peter disowns Jesus. Then seizing him, they led him away and took him into the house of the high priest. Peter followed at a distance. And when some there had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and had sat down together, Peter sat down with them. A servant girl saw him seated there in the firelight. She looked closely at him and said, "This man was with him." But he denied it. "Woman, I don't know him," he said. A little later, someone else saw him and said, "You are also one of them." "Man, I am not," Peter replied. About an hour later, another asserted, "Certainly this fellow was with him, for he is a Galilean." Peter replied, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." Just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word the Lord had spoken to him. "Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times." And he went outside and wept bitterly. Any thoughts as to who I read for? Yep, that's correct, John. So in Matthew 4:18 through 22, the Bible tells us how Jesus called his first disciples and how John came to be a follower of Christ. As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw 2 brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. "Come, follow me," Jesus said, "and I will send you out to fish for people." At once they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw 2 other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. And then Shay was our third reader. Any thoughts on who Shay was? Jairus' daughter is exactly right. So in Mark 5:21 through 43, we read of both Jesus' healing and resurrection power. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. Because she thought, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion, with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this, and told them to give her something to eat. I think the easiest one to tell was probably the next reading, and the one that probably made me a little emotional listening to it, just because I couldn't imagine being that person. So who do you think the next reader was? It was Sheila. Yep, Mary, the mother of Jesus. So finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified, so the soldiers took charge of Jesus. Carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on each side, and Jesus in the middle. Pilate had a notice prepared and fastened to the cross. It read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Many of the Jews read this sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and the sign was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. The chief priests of the Jews protested to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews, but that this man claimed to be the King of the Jews." Pilate answered, "What have I written? Or what I have written, I have written." When the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes, dividing them into 4 shares, one for each of them, with the undergarment remaining. The garment was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. "Let's not tear it," they said to one another. "Let's decide by lot who will get it." This happened that the scripture might be fulfilled that said, "They divided my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment." So this is what the soldiers did. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there, and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, "Woman, here is your son," and to the disciple, "Here is your mother." From that time on, this disciple took her into his home. Okay, and Jake was our final reader. We think that might have been. Yep, I heard a couple rumbles of it, the centurion. So this is what the Bible tells us that the centurion, the man guarding Jesus at his death, had to say in Matthew 27. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over all the land. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of those standing there had heard this, they said, "He's calling Elijah." Immediately one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled it with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. The rest said, "Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him." And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in 2 from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. When the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, "Surely he was the Son of God." Many women were there watching from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee to care for his needs. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's sons. So through all this, we recognize the events that led up to Scripture being fulfilled and Jesus dying on the cross for us. It is a difficult thing to put yourself in the position of these people who knew him personally, who were with him, who had to watch him suffer. But we can bear to commemorate Good Friday because we know what the Bible tells us is true. We know that Sunday is coming. Amen.